City.
Yes.
Where are we this week with the Proverbs?
We are in the country of Namibia, and for a very specific reason. They lost their leader. The president passed away yesterday.
Yeah.
Now, the relationship that Kenya has with Namibia is very long-standing. From the time when the UN contingent that was led by General Opande went to that country leading to their independence, and over the years this is the third president, by the way, from Sam Nujoma, Pohamba, and then this gentleman called Gain Gob, all members of SWAPO. Now, they are remembered for having supported Kenya, specifically former President Uhuru and now current President Ruto, during the ICC trials. They were very, very key supporters of this too. I'm simply saying that even after the UN mandate had ended, the Kenyan contingent in Namibia remained for 9 months. And General Opande was given one of the highest award you can give anyone in the country, the Order of the Rising Sun, for the services that the Kenya military provided for the military forces in Namibia. They were establishing their own military force then. So we remember this great man. So it's in his memory that we have Proverbs from Namibia for the whole of this week.
Okay.
A hunter in pursuit of an elephant does not stop to throw stones at birds.
A hunter in pursuit of an elephant does not stop to throw stones at birds. Ambassador Groth, what's your interpretation of this?
Well, throwing stones at birds is not my style. But I think the sense of it is just that you have a big task ahead of you and don't lose sight of your smaller tasks to accomplish them also. That would be my interpretation. I don't know if you go along with that.
Oh, your interpretation is perfect.
Makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
It makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about the cooperation that Kenya and Germany have on climate change. On matters climate change, you know that Kenya is at the forefront in leading these conversations. Our president chairs the AU Committee on Climate Change. We have hosted the inaugural Africa Climate Summit. We participated in the COPs, and we're also definitely going to participate in this year's COP29. But what's the cooperation between the two countries on this matter?
Well, first of all, it is really a long-standing cooperation. I think Kenya started the geothermal production in Olkaria in 81, and basically since 81, Germany is one of the key partners there in this regard. We are doing a broad portfolio of cooperation. So basically, we have 3 pillars that we work on. Beyond also climate change. It's agriculture, it's youth, TVET and employment, and climate change and energy. And I would say that this climate change energy portfolio is really now the signature cooperation between our two countries. So it's a lot about still production of renewable energy. We very much appreciate the Kenyan ambition to go to 100% renewables by 2030. You are at 93, 94, which is already quite impressive. But it's also about the grid, about the stability of the grid and the infrastructure. It's about technological cooperation. And there's another subject that is coming up. It's about green hydrogen. So ways and means to produce green hydrogen out of water, basically, and to use it either for industrial production or for the production of green fertilizer.
When you say cooperation, what exactly do you mean? Is it aid given to the country? Is it loans given to the country? Is it technical expertise?
It's everything. It's
Is it things that you've sold to the country?
No, so we have 2 branches basically. One is the financial cooperation with our development bank called KfW. So they're giving grants and loans. And then it's the technical cooperation by GIZ, where we really help with feasibility studies, with engineer concepts, with technology, from small to big. So to give you one example, in Kalubei near Kakuma, GIZ installed a 540 kilowatt solar panel station, which is enough for 20,000 households and about 200 to 300 SMEs. But we are also doing very sort of bigger infrastructure things like the financing of distribution hubs for high voltage electricity coming from Ethiopia. Yeah, that's a very broad portfolio.
Okay.
Sorry.
All of these conversations, whether we look at them from a bilateral point of view between nations, Germany, Kenya, Germany, are there any other country, Kenya and any other country, are all part of a larger conversation, and we usually see the culmination of that in summits, such as the one that took place in Nairobi last year, and the one that takes place every year, the Conference of Parties. We're getting towards 29 this year. But then we've just come off of 28, and there were certain things that were said and or done that would then design the route that a lot of these conversations and implementations would take. When we've come out of that, what are some of the general things that we're hoping we will actually see done before the world gets together again at the end of this year to discuss these things?
Well, I think one of the big achievements of last year's COP was the creation of the Loss and Damage Fund. That was a very big item for the German agenda, and on the very first day of the conference, together with the UAE, we put in some seed money in order to make this funding operational. Now we are between 700 and 800 million euros or dollars in this fund. So you see it's really up and running. The second thing that was quite important this time was the declaration that stated a phasing out of fossil fuels, which was not so much expected, also given the place where the conference took place, UAE, which is one of the biggest producers, of course, of fossil fuels, even if they are progressively transitioning also. But it was a very tough discussion, and I don't know if you remember when the first draft of the declaration came out, there was a lot of resistance,
Yes.
A lot of coalition building also. And again, Europe and Africa played a very, very important role also in pressing some of the other participants in being, let's say, more flexible on this point. And the third one is, and I think this is very significant for all of us, that there was a decision to triple the renewables on the baseline of 2019 up to 2035, I think, and to double the energy efficiency. And I think this will give a very, very big push globally to the installment of renewable capacity. And I think we are already seeing a very, very big dynamics in this field, because also the money and the capital will now move from fossil fuel more and more into renewable technologies.
Why was there resistance? And I think it's important here, because that was one of the things. It was a major thing. The world looked at it and said, okay, why is this conversation being had here? There was resistance, but there was also outright refusal by some to actually go with this move. Why is it so sensitive? Because it does form a lot of the climate conversations that we will have now and in the future.
True. No, I think there are a number of countries that base their prosperity and the economic development on the extraction of fossil fuels. And I think it's natural for them to defend this competitive advantage in a certain way, and to also signal. I mean, it is a very strong market signal. I would see it very economically. As if you write this on paper, the world, the banking world, the finance world now will shift more and more capital out of this sector, because it is clear that it's not giving a return on investment any longer, because the world will move out of it sooner or later. And I think it's very natural that if you have an economy that is based on these resources, that you try to want to defend this in a certain way, or even at least build the path as long as possible towards a transition.
You know, when you look at the history of energy on the planet over time, I find it very, very difficult to believe that we're going to get to a point where fossil fuels don't feature absolutely. Because the discussions that we keep having seems to be discussions on both or on extremes. Do away with it. There are those who talk about taking a middle ground approach to this whole thing, but that voice isn't very loud. The loud voice is, let's replace it completely. Now, if we were to take the view that, let's say, where we had the last COP meeting, UAE, well, they have solar in abundance. There's no question about that. But are we saying that the technology around solar has advanced to the point where now it can actually replace and do everything that's fossil fuels or power driven by fossil fuels has been able to do? Have we gotten to that point yet?
Well, not tomorrow, certainly, but I think what we are trying to manage is the transition. And this is why the wording and the declaration is so important, because it somehow frames the expectations of all the stakeholders in the sector and all the financial actors also. And if you look to the cost effectiveness of solar power, it decreased sharply. So it is now, even in Germany, where we don't have as much sun as you have here in Kenya or in Africa in general, it is about between 8 to 11 cents per kilowatt hour, whereas coal and others go between 18 and 20. So it is already much cheaper than the fossil option. There are two more things I think we have to consider here. First, fossil fuels or petrol is not only used for energy production, but it's also a very, very important ingredient for chemical production. And secondly, we use it in industry, and that's why this transition towards green hydrogen is so important for Germany, because we know that we need a lot of high input energy for our industrial sector, but we want to do it in a proper way and not in the old fossil way. And that's why the government took the strategic decision to create a green hydrogen sector in Germany, in Europe, but also to look for partners worldwide. This is North Africa. You talked about Namibia. Namibia is one of the key partners in this regard, but also Kenya can be a key partner in this regard, because we want to try to create a global supply and demand structure for green hydrogen in the next 5 to 10 years.
What is hydrogen going to be used for? Why is it so important?
It is important for a number of productions that need a high intensity energy, like steel, like cement, like glass, but also for transportation, for lorries and for ships. So there is the assumption that the big container ships will move towards green hydrogen machinery. So there will be a transition phase from diesel to methanol, but then in 5 to 10 years it will all move towards hydrogen, because it's the cleanest way as a high energy input factor. And by the way, Kenya can or could play a very important role in this regard, because you have the port of Mombasa. And the assumption amongst experts and analysts is that you need a sort of global network of green hydrogen petrol stations, basically, in ports all over the world. And one of this could be Mombasa. So if you act fast and decisively, I think Kenya could have a very, very competitive advantage in this regard.
All these conversations about the transition from fossil into new forms of energy, renewable energy, means a lot of R&D. So for research to take place, then you need to have the capacity to basically support that research, to fund that research, to even energize that research. And this is where then you find that the developed world is far ahead of the developing world in their capacity to conduct the research, to adopt the research, to own the patent for the new developed research that goes on. Now, isn't that an imbalance? When we see that the developed world is saying, let's push towards the end of consumption of fossil fuels, let us discourage the developing world and other countries from heavy adaptation of fossil fuels, and let's support them in going green. But even as you do that, the technology would not be sufficient to support an economy to develop if you just say go green and don't use fossil fuel. So what I'm asking is, does that not paint an imbalance between the developed world that's already developed, that's still using a lot of fossil fuel, that is preaching to the underdeveloped world to stop using fossil fuel, to discourage itself from using fossil fuel, while at the same time it has ambitions of developing?
No, I think this is a very important question, and the first point would be that this transition should not hinder economic growth, and it's not up to the developed world to tell the developing world or emerging economies sort of what to do and what not to do, or to reduce the speed of the economic development. This would never work. We can only prove that it's a good concept if we ourselves develop economically and get clean at the same time. I think the big advantage for countries like Kenya and probably Africa in general is this concept of leapfrogging. You don't have to do the mistakes that we did for 80 or 120 years. We see this in the mobile sector, for example, but we see it also in other sectors. So this idea especially of green hydrogen as the high impact, high efficient energy input for industrialization can work even better here in Kenya, because you can build up the industry at the same time when you build up the green hydrogen sector. So I think it is more an advantage than a disadvantage. And the question about research and development, I would not be so pessimistic. I've been in this country also 22 years ago, and from 2001 to 2004. And I see a very big difference now in the cooperation between our two countries, but also between other countries of the so-called North with Kenya in research and development. I give you two examples. One is an impressive young lady who is doing research on green hydrogen and copper, and she received a machinery, a sort of microwave machinery to analyze the copper, the characteristics of copper when you alter the temperatures, and she's a top specialist in this field. And then there's another cooperation between an Italian university and the University of Machakos. They are doing research on satellites and solar systems to cool satellites. Never would I have imagined 25 years ago that these sorts of scientific cooperations would one time happen. I think this is showing the way, and you shouldn't underestimate the capacity also of your people here and your university. So I think the benefit is in cooperation and not in separation or domination, but really in cooperation, and that's what we are striving for.
You see, why there may be a little hesitation when we talk of cooperation is the lived experience of this continent, where cooperation has often meant veiled domination. The conversation is cooperation, but somewhere along the line you'll be shortchanged. Now, if I look at this conversation of energy, I actually find it absolutely fascinating, because most of what is discussed I actually don't understand. That's why it's fascinating. But I look at solar. We have it in abundance. Most people here in this conversation think the solar discussion began yesterday. This thing has been there for decades. We have been told by experts in the field that one of the biggest problems with the wind and probably solar is storage. How do you harness it so that when the sun isn't shining, we have stored 1 week's worth of energy somewhere? So whether it shines or not, it doesn't really matter. We'll have that particular energy, or whatever we produce by wind, a similar process. Now, there are companies like Tesla who keep coming up with all sorts of things that they're doing. Germany has companies that, but again, is this technology advanced enough to the point where countries on this continent, let's say sub-Saharan Africa, who have more solar than they know what to do with, could actually use this power? Because this is power that will propel the things that we want to do to a completely different, because this is a resource we have in plenty. Has technology reached that level?
I'm sure it will advance. I talked about this 540 kilowatt thing in Kalu Bay.
Yes.
And the engineers told me that if you have a total capacity of 540, you have a battery capacity 2 to 3 times as big. That means you have lithium batteries that can store 1,000 kilowatt to 1,500 kilowatts. So that means that you can bridge a night always, and even 1 or 2 more, let's say, bad days, or where you have technical complications and stuff. But this was absolutely feasible. So, and you can produce with this decentralized installation as much energy as you need for 20,000 households and 200 SMEs. I found this quite fascinating because the sun in Turkana is so strong.
It's oppressive.
It shouldn't be a problem, to build just hundreds of these solar islands and help a lot of villages to develop and a lot of SMEs. There is a point of grid stability that you have to address. If you do it in a decentralized way, you need a very, very robust grid, and you need also shadow capacities. That means you have to have some base load production in the net that is constantly running in order to stabilize it. That's why I think we will go for a mix sooner or later, and that's also why probably technology like carbon storage will play a role. That means you take out the carbon out of the energy production and pump it into the soil. Experts say it is feasible. It is also not detrimental to the environment, but this is also an idea that is discussed now in Europe more and more, because we will have productions in our economies where you just have emissions. It's just not avoidable. So, but what do you do then with these emissions?
Yeah.
And the idea is this CCS. But this is not a concept for tomorrow, but I know that engineers are working on this.
The big issue that's going on now, the buzzword in the country and around the globe, is carbon trading. And everybody's talking about this. And then there are those who say this carbon trading story is just a way for the polluters to continue polluting, and then they pay a pittance because they come in and decide how much they're going to pay in the open market. It's an open market, so you come and bid. So you'll basically determine how much you want to pay for the sins that you've committed. And for that, the developing world is required to not do much to the environment. Just keep the trees growing. Don't cut down the trees. Don't go into fossil fuel production. All right? We will pay you so that you remain where you are. What do you say to that?
Well, I think the general idea is good because it's a system of price incentives, and we are experimenting with it in Europe and Germany for quite a while. So we have a CO2 trade. It's like a stock exchange. 1 ton has a certain price. You get a certain amount. If you have a production site, let's say for glass or cement, you get a certain amount, and if you use more, you have to buy them on the market. If you use less, you can sell them on the market. And it's working quite well, and we will extend it also to new sectors like heating and like mobility, which was not the case before. What you are talking about now is also not so new. It was labeled the clean development mechanism, meaning that as a company, I can help a community in Kenya or in Congo or whatsoever to reforest and get credits then from this investment that I can use for my own production in Europe. I think the main point in this is that it doesn't get a scam, that it's really transparent, non-corrupt, and that it's also benefiting to the communities. And there are some interesting reports out now where you can see it did not always happen in a very, very good way. So in Zimbabwe there was a scandal, and in other countries also where you feel that the control mechanisms did not work properly, and that's a lot of greenwashing also involved. And this is what has to be involved. But I think the general idea is good. It's all about implementation.
Do you think that there's a general complete understanding of these processes? There would appear as though there are suggestions that are made to folks who would be involved in the process who really don't have a complete comprehension of what it means. And that's where then you will find that situation that you talk about, because isn't that what happens in a scam? That there's one party that fully understands what's happening, there's another party who maybe partially understands, and then there's some money that floats around. So from where I see it, if we're going to talk about accountability and transparency in this climate conversation, whether we're talking about fossil fuels or we're talking about carbon trading, whatever it is that we're talking about, where money is going to move. And transparency for me means that everybody has to be on the same level when it comes to comprehension of these things. Whether you're a president, or whether you're a journalist, or whether you're a practitioner, or you're an expert in your field when it comes to education. That's across board. Anybody who's going to be involved in these processes, whatever they may be, must understand doctrine from beginning to end. Otherwise, it makes it very easy for the scams that you speak of to take place.
I absolutely agree, and there's a lot of work to be done by international partners, by NGOs, also by national governments here. But I think also what we have to think about is a sort of global oversight mechanism that is looking into things and avoiding these sort of scams. Because it's a lot about trust, and if you destroy this trust into a new market, it will never evolve, it will never develop. But as I really would like to repeat that the general idea of working with price incentives, I think, is a very, very good idea. And the other point is it's also important to valorize the assets that you have also on this continent in terms of biodiversity, in terms of carbon sinks, in terms of just environmental quality, and to compensate that this is conserved and retained, I think is a natural thing. So to think about this and to implement these sort of mechanisms, I think is the right way, but we have to avoid scams and this asymmetry of information.
Sure. There's also, and I mean, look, I think that this conversation will always come into play here, because here we talk about the outcomes of COP28, hoping that we go to COP29 and that we are talking about having moved a few steps. There's always been the fear that the world gathers for expensive conferences to come and talk about things that time and energy, no pun intended, could be used to actually implement some of these things. Do we run the risk of continuous speech, talking, at the expense of actual implementation of some of these things? Or are these meetings just as important to have?
Sure. You know, I was struck once when the president said, the Kenyan president, I think it was a UNEP meeting in Gigiri, and he said we have to stop with all these climate conferences. And I started thinking, probably he has a point. But on the other hand, these are very important gatherings because it is a global conversation, and we need a sort of minimal global consensus on these things. If we need really 40,000 people or 80,000 people or 90,000 people, I think that can be discussed. I think probably even 15,000 would be enough. Or 20. I don't know. I've never attended these sort of conferences, but if I read these figures, I ask myself, is it really necessary to have so many people? On the other hand, we are talking about inclusion. We are talking about representation of women, of youth, of indigenous people, of NGOs, of scientists, of activists. So if you take all these numbers and then you want them from north, south, east, and west, it's easily that you come up to higher numbers. And but I think the issue that you're raising is absolutely justified and legitimate, and we should rather try to refocus than to broaden it time and again. I think in at the COP28 we were between 70 and 80,000 people, which is really a very big number.
It was a huge number.
Yeah,
So many people.
It is.
Yes, many people.
Yeah. Within Germany itself, Ambassador, there appears to be very many divergent views on energy on conservation, on climate change, and how to handle it. There are those that say, let's be radical and drastic and immediately begin cutting back on our use of fossil fuels and accelerating our adoption of green renewables. Then there are those that say, no, let's make it step by step. Depending on who's in power, you'll have those conversations going on. What's the current conversation in the country?
I would say that the general consensus to move away from fossil and coal is still intact. Last year, for example, we had for the first time nearly 60% renewables in our energy basket. It very much depends in Germany on the wind, because we have a lot of wind production. But there is a government decision to go to 80% renewables by 2030 and to be climate neutral by 2045, meaning that we don't have a negative emissions account, so to speak. So, and this is a very ambitious goal for an industrialized economy. Germany still has 20 to 22% of its economy based on real production. So it's not a service economy like many others. And in this regard, it is even more difficult and more challenging, I think, for us than probably for other economies to go down this path. But I think that this general consensus is still intact. The real challenge, and we talked about this just a few minutes ago, is to make sure that economic and social prosperity and stability is in line with this transition path, so that you don't lose the people. And we had one very difficult discussion in Germany about our heating systems half a year ago, and that was a point in time where you saw some cracks in society and also some distancing of this agenda. But I think now we are beyond this. It was a very deep discussion, a very honest discussion also, but I think now a sort of consensus is reestablished.
What's the consensus?
As I said, the consensus is that there is no better alternative than to do this transition. And as you say, there might be a discussion about the speed and about the radicality of this transition, but even the big economic players in Germany, and we have big chemical companies, for example, or cement or steel. They want to be in the avant-garde of producing green steel, for example. That's why we want this transition towards green hydrogen. The only thing that they are demanding from the government, and I think that's also justified from their standpoint, is a stable framework so that they can plan 5 to 10 to 15 years ahead, because that's the investment cycles for these heavy industries. And if you change the direction every 2-3 years, of course, that's not feasible for big companies, but I think insofar they have a fixed framework and an environment that they can operate within. They are all aligned with this agenda.
You know, every time one hears of this discussion, one thinks trees, vegetation. At least that's where I'm at, and I'm thinking of places like Kibwezi. I'm thinking of places in Narok that I've visited where people have actually indigenous forests, and some they are growing them. Now, how do you tie in this? Because our forest cover has gone below what our constitution requires. We're at 8.8, and yet our constitution demands 10%, which is really a small minimum. But how do we tie this to this heavy-duty technological discussion we are having? Because there seems to be a correlation somewhere. Where is it?
No, I mean, reforestation is a strong point in this regard, and it's one of the very important projects also for the president, and we are supporting it also from the German Development Corporation side. But there are other things like I learned a lot about mangroves, for example. They are so important for the ecosystem of the coast, but also absorbing CO2. They absorb 3 times more CO2 than normal trees. So that's why it is so important to support initiatives in Kwale County and in Lamu County, where we have a lot of women groups groups, for example, that plant mangroves. I mean, these are all small things, and we have also to be realistic about the effects, but they are so important because combining all these small things, reforestation, protection of forests in the environment, doing something for the mangroves, can all add up to a high number of CO2 absorption, which is very, very important.
Even as you say that, everybody doing small things here, or even large things, reforestation, looking at the mangroves, and this is Kenya. Other countries doing all sorts of things, who eventually all come together and have a conversation every year. But in terms of mechanisms for tracking adaptation, because that's essentially what we're asking every nation to do today, make sure that you're doing a little bit of something so that it contributes to this larger pie. But who's making sure that everybody's actually doing what they've come to COP every year to say they're going to do, that is actually being done? Who's making sure France, Germany, the US, who's making sure that Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, who's making sure that Japan, Hong Kong, is doing what they've come here to say that they're actually going to do? You talk about a global oversight, but who's actually going to say, hold on a minute, who's making sure these things are actually being done year on year, minute on minute, to see what, progress we're actually making?
That's a very important question, and that was one of the main parts of the discussion also at COP28. We are talking about the national contributions in this regard, so the Paris commitments basically. And now there's also for the first time a definition of a mechanism how to do exactly this, how to track what governments are doing. So you submit a plan to the Secretariat, but then it is evaluated and is checked. But I think also a lot of international NGOs are doing a very, very important work. You can, for example, for each and every country, you can check it online on a site called Global Carbon Tracker. You can see how far a country like Kenya or Germany is approaching its own aims and commitments or failing. Because both is possible, of course, and so it's very easy to see. But I would like to mention another thing, because we talked a lot about international cooperation, and there was one result also, or new initiative at COP28 that is quite important, where Kenya and Germany played a very important role. It's a partnership for the acceleration of renewable energies. So it's a commitment of some African countries to go towards 100% in the near future, 2030, 2040. And Kenya, Germany and Denmark, together with the IRENA, that's the Agency for Renewable Energy, which is based in Abu Dhabi also, brought together 6 or 7 African countries. So it's Zimbabwe, it's Rwanda, it's Ethiopia, it's Sierra Leone, it's Kenya and Namibia. And these countries already committed to go towards 100%. And the initiative will help to bring money to the table, to bring technology to the table, and to bring the private sector to the table. And I think that's exactly the way we have to move forward. Because you were also asking about why are we now asking the developing countries to not to develop economically? But I think that's not the right question. The question is, how can they develop economically, but in a good sense, with clean energy.
Of the 60% or so percent of the clean renewable energy mix in Germany, part of it, a huge proportion of it is nuclear, isn't it?
No, not at all. We are phasing out. We don't have any nuclear anymore. We shut down the last 3 nuclear plants in April last year.
Why?
Because there was government consensus after Fukushima, basically, 2011, that it was the original decision to phase out of nuclear was taken before, under a coalition between the Social Democrats and the Green Party around between 98 and 2005. Then there was a new government that put into question this decision and wanted to prolong the life cycle of the nuclear plants that we had. But then came Fukushima 2011, and then the then government said, now that shows that even in a highly industrialized country like Japan, nuclear energy seems not to be a very, very safe option. So we want to phase out. Then again, we had the Russian war against Ukraine and a very difficult situation in the energy sector in Germany. And we had still 6 nuclear plants running, 3 phased out then at the end of 2022. But then there was a very difficult discussion in the government, but there was the decision to prolong for another 3.5 months the 3 last nuclear plants that we have in order to stabilize the net. But now we don't have any nuclear production anymore.
So what power source do you use?
As I said, it's 60% renewables, it's gas and it's coal. It's lignite and the other coal.
And the renewable here, so it's mainly wind.
The renewable is mainly wind, it's onshore and offshore, and the wind will also be the main investment when we go towards the 80% by 2030. So from 60 to 80, but at the same time the electric cake the total volume of electricity production will get much bigger, because as in every advanced economy there's a tendency to electrify the economy more and more.
Yeah. So is Germany against development of nuclear power, nuclear energy?
In the discussions that we are leading, for example, in the European Union, we are positioning ourselves against it. So it's not up to us to tell other countries what to do or what not to do, but there was, for example, discussion in the European Union if nuclear energy could be labeled as a green energy, as a sustainable energy. And there we were quite hesitant, because you have to look at the whole life cycle from the uranium production and exploration to the deposit of the garbage one day.
Waste.
So in the German understanding, it's still not a clean energy, even if the electricity production as such is less CO2 insensitive than with gas or with coal, of course.
You know, it's interesting, but the mix and just the debate around this, because coal is also not renewable.
True.
And yet it is used because it is available and it has to be used. Again, this balance, does it not take center stage in the discussions? How do you balance it? Because, for instance, the technology that is being used in Germany, some of it may be used here, but then that's a discussion for another day.
No, I give you one reason is really the war of Russia against Ukraine, because Germany depended very much on the importation of
Gas.
petrol, of fuel, of coal and of gas from Russia, all above 50% of our import basket. Now it's below 10 or even below 5%. So within 2 years, we managed to transition from a highly dependent relationship based on energy with Russia to a totally diversified mix. And I think that was a big achievement, and we should not underestimate it.
It's huge.
Yeah.
That's a big one. Ambassador, we thank you very much for joining us today. And these conversations that we've had, please come again soon. We'll need to talk about a lot more other things, other areas of cooperation, for example, TVETs, and why you're supporting us in TVETs, and then the job that you want us to come and do in your country and the service industry, not on the TVET sector. It's a big one.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
It's an open invitation.
Okay.
Yes.
And you will come.
Yes, I will come, that's for sure. Tutalana hivi karibuni. Asante.
Sebastian Groth is the German ambassador to Kenya. He's been our guest.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.